Have you ever wondered what is ground zero for climate change? Well, as the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene, I'm going to call it the Bible. I'm going to call out Genesis that, to summarize, it says God gave humans dominion over animals in nature. We're up here, they're down here, they serve us. It's a hierarchy. Well, where has that gotten us? It's a question I've wondered my whole life. I was raised in Southern California in a very liberal area, and I had no idea how Manifest Destiny contributed to America's climate change problems, contributed to flooding, drought, wildfires. Just to start, the storage of carbon. I had no idea that carbon is stored in kelp. And the otters facilitate that. In the ground, the bison facilitate that. In the groundwater, beavers facilitate that. Wow. I had no idea, but I have learned a lot recently. And so I'm going to share today, and then we're going to explore more about how the Christian worldview, the external locus of power, sets us up for the victim mindset, sets us up to be mentally ill like we are today. There's, we have a mental illness crisis in the West and probably in the East too, but I know we have a mental illness crisis in the West. So let's start with one video that is like one of my favorites. It is of how Yellowstone returned the wolves and why. And it's all about Manifest Destiny. The Europeans came to America and we killed about 60 million bison to decimate the Native American population. That was decimated by about 90%, and they have only recently reestablished their population. Beavers had like 400 million beavers and took it down maybe 10,000. Wolves just killed them out of Yellowstone. Salmon. Oh, we need the dams. Salmon can't spawn. No salmon. Tons of that. Salmon prevent wildfires. We're going to get into that. Like, that was like a fish. Wow. Like, okay. I'm a nerd. I'm a full nerd. I have a master's degree in Chinese. Like, I'm full nerd. So I nerd out on this stuff. So let's start with the wolves. And then the wolves, what they are called, they create a trophic cascade. So by their presence in the park, they naturally corral the elk. And when they corral the elk who are eating all the trees, they stabilize the ground and they bring back the trees by the rivers, and that's a great environment for the beavers. Well, the beaver environment, they do 80%. They support 80% of wildlife where they are. And that's just to start. This video shows how $94 billion was saved by returning about 14 wolves to Yellowstone in the 90s. 14 wolves equals $94 billion. I think we got a lot to learn here. So let me share that first video and we'll do a deep dive. Let me start back at the beginning. Now I'm having problems sharing my screen. I'm sorry. Let me just make it full screen. Oh, no, it was. I was already in the right place and then I messed it up for myself. Okay, no one's perfect, right? Including me.
What if I told you that 14 wolves changed the course of an entire ecosystem? In 1995, the US government did something that seemed pretty simple. They took 14 Canadian wolves and released them into Yellowstone National Park. What followed wasn't just the restoration of a species.
They chose the Canadian wolves because the other animals that they would be hunting in the park would be most similar to the Canadian wolves. So that's why they chose them.
It was the transformation of an entire ecosystem, the revival of a dying landscape, and an economic miracle that would eventually save America $94 billion. But to understand how 14 wolves managed to do all this, we need to go back to when everything started going wrong. Here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit that like button if you're ready for an incredible story about how nature can heal itself in the most unexpected ways. Let's start in the early 1900s. Back then, wolves were seen as nothing but pests, dangerous predators that needed to be eliminated. The US government actually had official wolf killers, people whose job was literally to just shoot, trap, or poison every wolf they could find. And they were
I did another video, similar video on this topic, and one of the comments was, wolves kill for fun. Well, I know through all my healing work and my research that we live in a holographic universe, that the universe is a mirror showing us ourselves in every moment as a constant feedback loop for self-improvement. We project how we feel about ourselves out of our hearts onto the field so that we can see ourselves and see what's good and see what needs improvement. So that was a projection. And right now, they just, oh, kill wolves, kill the wolves. Go have a good time, kill the wolves. They're just, they kill for fun. They don't, kill elk and corral elk because that's what maintains the environment, that they have an inner source of authority. See, like when we believe there's an external source of authority and they create a hierarchy, we don't give wolves and animals credit that they're a soul having a wolf experience, like I'm a soul having a human experience. You're a soul having a buffalo experience. That we're all souls. That every soul houses the same wisdom and knowledge inside of it. It doesn't recognize that. We're right, they're wrong, they're the problem, short-term thinking, reactive, with no long-term thinking. Like, maybe ask the Native Americans who've lived here for 10,000 years, how they have a healthy relationship with the animals. But we were busy being right because God gave us dominion over the animals and nature. Busy being right. I realized that when I was busy being right, I did not take time to self-reflect, because being right, all the time, being perfect, that's a very time-consuming job.
really good at their jobs. By 1926, the last wolf pack in Yellowstone had been killed. People celebrated this as a victory. They had no idea what they'd just done.
They had made a lot of money. I mean, the fur trade was huge. That's why the otters were gone, the beavers, the wolves, the bison. They'd leave the carcass and take the wool, the skin. Like my dad, my grandpa, hunters, fly fishermen, but they did it right. Like my grandpa loved to eat bison and elk and venison, deer and rabbit. He loved all of that. My dad too. Like my brother knows how to skin a deer. How many kids in these days are taught how to hunt and provide for themselves? When we outsource all of our responsibilities to other people, then we don't engage in it ourselves. And the healthiest, most testosterone producing, cortisol reducing, stress relieving activity for a man, because we're opposites, right, is chopping wood. But how many men chop wood these days? Like Carl Jung, psychologist, he lived the end of his life, he did everything for himself, and he was happy as a clam. Are we designed for convenience? Or are we designed to do the work? Because addiction is you get the dopamine hit, and dopamine hit, reward, and then, you just ever increasing need to get that reward. But when there's work between the reward and you have to exercise physically and you engage both sides of your nervous system, the feminine, the communication, the accent, the action, the masculine, then there's the health and the well-being.
But here's where it gets really interesting. At first, everything seemed fine. Sure, there were no wolves, but who needs wolves, right? Wrong. Over the next few decades, things started going terribly wrong. But so slowly that at first, nobody noticed. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Like I said, there were 400 million beavers down to 10,000. When the wolves entered Yellowstone, there was one beaver family. And we're going to see how quickly that increased to 100 because of the wolves.
Without wolves, the elk population exploded. And I mean exploded. By the 1990s, there were about 19,000 elk in Yellowstone's northern range alone. These elk basically turned into living lawnmowers, eating every young tree and bush they could find. Aspen trees, willows, cottonwoods, nothing stood a chance. Saplings would sprout in the spring, and by winter, they'd all be gone.
If all the trees are gone, how do the beavers build dams? What do they have to eat? And when the trees are gone, there's a lot of runoff in the rivers. That's not good for the beavers and the fish.
I hear you asking, Couldn't they just hunt the elk to control the population? Well, they tried. But here's something fascinating. Wolves don't just kill elk, they change how elk behave. This is something scientists call the ecology of fear, and it's way more important than anyone
Yeah, that's how
realized.
they draw a healthy boundary. Okay, you don't come by the rivers. You don't eat all these trees. We're down here. And since they're wolves, they're not fighting that they think they know better. They follow their intuition and then they act. And you're going to see in a second about how amazing these wolves are, especially one male wolf that did things that were very wise and compassionate and that's not typically seen among wolves. So different wolves can have different pieces of wisdom and knowledge and act in different ways. They're a soul having a wolf experience.
When there are no wolves around, elk can just stand in one place, munching away until they've eaten everything. It's like teenagers raiding a refrigerator when their parents are away for the
Lack of
weekend.
healthy boundaries. That's when we get dysfunction. Lack of healthy boundaries. Same thing is true in nature as it is with humans because we're all souls. So when we learn how to operate our souls, then we won't be mentally ill anymore. When we accept that we live in a holographic universe, that the universe is a mirror, we're going to stop blaming everybody else for our problems and take accountability for our own problems, which is a huge issue right now, but times are changing.
But with wolves present, elk have to keep moving, stay vigilant, avoid certain areas. They can't just hang out by rivers and streams all day, eating all the young trees. By the early 1990s, Yellowstone was in serious trouble. The park's ecosystem was collapsing, but most visitors had no idea. They'd see the beautiful mountains, the geysers, the elk everywhere, and think everything was perfect. But scientists were watching a different story unfold. The decision to bring back wolves wasn't an easy one. Ranchers fought against it, worried about their livestock.
Because
Hunters weren't happy.
so when we brought cattle over from Europe, cattle are half as heavy as bison. And the way they interact with the land is totally different than the bison. The bison revive the ecology. They create climate resilience. Cattle, they just, like the elk, they just graze everything. And the way that the buffalo roll on the land and the buffalo rub up against trees to kind of prevent tree growth on the prairies, and then their fur stays in the tree and the birds use that for their nests. See, when we follow our inner guidance, slowly but surely, everything will come into a healthy relationship. There's still life and death, of course, because you can't be born without dying. Those two go together, like men and women go together. But we're still at such a fundamental level understanding this. I mean, we still argue what is a healthy woman and what is a healthy man, the most basic binary there is. So how much progress can we have really made in terms of relationships, especially our relationship with ourselves, which is a mirror for all other relationships? Like when my soul has lots of fear, guilt, and shame in it, I don't want to be in myself and I reject myself, and then I project that outwards, that self-rejection, and then other people naturally reject me to show me that I'm rejecting myself. That's why I had failed relationships my whole life. Failed marriage, lack of friendships, challenges with my kids because I didn't love myself. But when I love and accept myself, accept that I'm a soul having a human experience and that all these animals have souls too, and that inner guidance will naturally lead us to a healthy, harmonious relationship, where climate change isn't an issue. I mean, these animals, these keystone species and the wolves creating this trophic cascade enable the earth and water to store carbon. Carbon is stored in seaweed, which otters keep the kelp forest healthy. Without otters, the sea urchin kill all the kelp. But the sea urchin are very plentiful, and the sea otters need to eat a lot of sea urchins. So with the otters there and their need to eat so much, like 25% of their body weight every day, that's in right relationship. It doesn't mean the otters are bad because they're eating so many sea urchins. That's the way nature evolved to be in harmony, so that we have the kelp to store the carbon, and then we have the sea urchins. I don't know all the things sea urchins do, but then, the otters eat from them. But when we decide that we're right and that they just don't matter, that we're just better, okay, then, we create, we all create our own problems. Manifest destiny was one of them.
either. They thought wolves would decimate the elk population they relied on. Some locals even spread rumors that the government was planning to release super wolves, specially bred killing machines that would terrorize the entire region. But here's something most people don't know: the wolves chosen for reintroduction were carefully selected. They picked wolves from Canada because these wolves were used to hunting the same prey they'd find in Yellowstone. They choose wolves from different packs to ensure genetic diversity. And get this, they even looked for wolves that had never had conflicts with humans or livestock. The actual reintroduction was like something out of
I
a
mean,
movie.
planning
In
around that kind of
January
trauma
1990,
is really smart because if a wolf has a traumatic experience with a human, they're more likely to be fearful and react. So that was smart planning.
14 wolves were brought in, each one carefully sedated and transported in separate crates. The wolves were kept in acclimation pens for several weeks, allowing them to get used to their new home while still being protected. When they were finally released, nobody knew if they'd stay in the park or just run away. Not only did they stay, but they thrived. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Each wolf pack developed its own personality, its own hunting style, even its own family drama that researchers could follow like some wild animal soap opera. Take the Druid Peak Pack, for example. They became the most famous wolf pack in Yellowstone's history. Led by a wolf known as 21M, nicknamed the Gentleman, this pack grew to 37 members, the largest ever recorded in the park. Wolf 21 became legendary not just for his size and strength, but for his unusual behavior. He never killed defeated rivals, adopted orphaned pups, and stayed with the same mate for life. When his mate died, he stopped eating and died shortly after. Even scientists who try to avoid anthropomorphizing animals admitted this was something special. But the wolves didn't just create interesting stories. They started changing everything around them. And I mean everything. Scientists call it a trophic cascade. But really, it was more like ecological dominoes falling in ways
See,
nobody
here's the
had
thing.
predicted.
Nobody had predicted. Oh, well, the Native Americans could have told us that. But we were busy being better than them because we were Christian and we knew and God gave us dominion. So we don't listen to, they're just the savages. They're the savages. They live in a holographic universe. The universe is a mirror. Were they the savages?
First, the elk population started dropping, but not just because wolves were hunting them. The elk actually started behaving differently. They avoided valleys and gorges where they could be easily trapped. They spent less time by rivers where wolves could ambush them. This meant that in these areas, young trees could finally grow without being eaten. Within just a few years, new aspen, willow, and cottonwood trees were sprouting up along rivers. But this wasn't just about trees growing. It was the start of something much bigger. Those trees stabilized riverbanks, preventing erosion. This actually changed the rivers
Look at
themselves.
all those
They
trees.
became less wandering.
The river on the right, beavers can work with. They need trees. River on the left, we understand why only one beaver family was left in the park. One beaver population.
More stable and clearer. The changes in Yellowstone's rivers were just the beginning. With more trees along the riverbanks, beavers started coming back. Now, this is where things get really fascinating. In 1995, there was only one beaver colony in the park. By 2012, there were 9. Today, there are so many that scientists have trouble keeping count.
Look what happens when we let nature be and the animals follow their inner guidance. You can't stop a beaver from building dams. You can't stop a wolf from corralling elk. It's in them. We can't stop buffalo from wallowing on the ground and creating these kind of areas where when it rains in the spring, the water stays there, and then that's a habitat for frogs and salamanders and insects. And then there's more water, groundwater, more aquifer, so that we don't have drought. Femininity, there's Mother Earth, right? And so it's relationships are important to women. Femininity is important relationships, and men, based on a lot of scientific data, focus on things. That's why so many engineers are men, and so many women are nurses. And I'm holding my buffalo here from my son, who went to the Channel Islands Marine Institute in 5th grade, like my daughters did too. Their elementary school all went there. We live in Ventura, California on the beach. And then in the 1920s, they brought about 10 buffalo to Channel Islands. And now there's a Marine Institute, and that herd grew to 600, and then they moved about 500 elsewhere. But my kids have always had buffalo in their life, and my grandpa had a buffalo head in his den. Like his whole den was filled of dead animal heads, you know. But that's why I get so moved by it, because when we're in right relationship with ourselves, then it opens the door to right relationships with everything else, and nature, something we all need to focus on.
And beavers, it turns out, are nature's engineers. Every beaver dam created new wetland habitat. These wetlands attracted more species: frogs, fish, birds, insects, and even otters. Fish, birds, the dams also help prevent erosion and filter water, making the rivers cleaner. They even help during droughts by holding water in the landscape longer. But here's something nobody expected.
The bears.
The wolves started affecting the bears.
Wow. I just love it. I just love it. I'm glad I'm safe watching it from a video, but I love it.
How? Well, when wolves make a kill, they don't eat everything. They leave behind what scientists call wolf kills, basically leftover elk carcasses. These leftovers became a crucial food source for all sorts of animals, including grizzly bears. And it gets even more interesting. Remember those berries I mentioned the elk were eating? With fewer elk around, berry bushes started growing back. More berries meant more food for bears, especially in late summer when they're preparing for hibernation. Scientists found that Yellowstone's grizzly bears now get a significant portion of their diet from berries that wouldn't exist without wolves. And here's something that will really blow your mind. In 2017, scientists discovered that wolves might even be affecting Yellowstone's supervolcano. Yeah, you heard that right. Before wolves returned, the overgrazing elk were compacting the soil so much that it affected how underground heat dispersed. When wolves changed elk behavior and vegetation started growing back, it actually helped the soil become less compacted.
Who saw that coming?
This allowed underground heat to disperse more evenly. Now, this doesn't mean wolves are preventing a volcanic eruption, but it shows just how deep their influence goes. Literally. Scientists studying the park's geothermal features never expected that the return of a predator could affect something as fundamental as how heat moves through the ground.
When we call something a predator, it's like a savage needs to be killed. It's not morally right. It's not correct. It needs to be rooted out. That's our job, to make that decision, to root out the predator.
It's just another example of how everything in nature is connected in ways we're still discovering. Even the coyotes were affected, though not in a way they probably appreciated. Before wolves returned, coyotes were the top dog in Yellowstone. They had no competition. But wolves don't like coyotes at all. The wolf pack started killing coyotes and driving them out of certain areas. The coyote population dropped by 50%. This might sound bad, but it had some surprising benefits. With fewer coyotes around, populations of small mammals started increasing. More mice and voles meant more food for hawks, owls, foxes, and weasels.
The coyotes.
The whole food web became more complex.
Stopped overeating the small mammals, so now the birds and the foxes can
more stable. Now, let's talk about that $94 billion. Because this is where the story gets really interesting from an economic perspective. When scientists started calculating the economic benefits of all these changes, they had to consider things nobody had thought about before. First, there's tourism. Wolf watching alone brings in about $35 million per year to the communities around Yellowstone. People come from all over the world just to see these wolves. Some dedicated wolf watchers spend thousands of dollars on special equipment just to observe them from a distance. But that's just the beginning. The recovering forests capture and
Right.
store
The
carbon
earth
dioxide,
naturally
a
stores
service
carbon
that's worth
dioxide.
billions in terms
But
of
when the
climate
earth isn't
change mitigation.
functioning properly because we killed the animals that work with the earth to make it function properly, we create our own problem. So I really ask the question, is the problem that we're burning too much fuel, or is the problem that we've destroyed our environment so it can't store the carbon properly and process it through properly? I'm not a scientist, but I'm kind of leaning toward the second. That maybe it's not an either or, but we'll see.
The healthier rivers and streams reduce water treatment costs for surrounding communities. The restored wetlands help prevent flooding and provide natural water storage. And here's something really unexpected. The wolves are even saving money on road maintenance. How? Well, with fewer elk hanging around on riverbanks, there's less erosion. Less erosion means more stable ground, which means roads and bridges last
So
longer and need
I'm going to
fewer
leave it
repairs.
there, and
But
I'm
not
going to link
everything
the
has been
video
perfect.
below.
The wolf reintroduction program has
Wow.
faced its share of challenges.
14 wolves did all that? That's just wow. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, let's dive into the salmon. And this one is a little bit more scientific, and they're going to use words like epigenetics. Epigenetics is the field of science that shows that epi means before genetics. So what happens before genetics? But this brings in an Einstein quote. The field is the sole governing agency of the particle being the genetics, the field being what? Well, physicists have proven that we all have energy bodies. We all have souls that go out about 6 meters from our body. They go up and out and back, out from our hearts. And our heart is a vortex. We'll get into that later. But yeah, let's keep exploring, and let's look at the salmon and the dams. Okay, and then we'll explore the bison, and then we're gonna get to the otters because the otters are just the cutest. So I'm gonna save them for last because they're just the cutest. I'm a girl. What do you want? Okay, let's look at the salmon. And my grandpa, my dad, they salmon fish all the time. Like I went trout fishing by Mammoth, and we caught golden trout that have pink fish, pink meat. Okay, here we go. Let me make it full screen, and then we'll get going.
Was dammed in 2 places to generate electricity.
A river in Washington state was dead, biologically flat.
So we put dams and rivers to create electricity, but then as you see with this dead fish, what happened to the fish?
Flatlined.
The dams blocked the passage of fish, and salmon virtually disappeared here.
Then humans intervened with a wild idea: blow up the dams and borrow some fish from Canada. It sounded crazy. Critics said it was a waste of money, but then the fish came back. Not just a few, but thousands. And they didn't just swim. They started physically rebuilding the riverbed with their bodies.
Where had they come from? The answer sounds like a fairy tale. How had they arrived? By swimming against one of the most powerful rivers on Earth, past 8 deadly dams, all the way up from the Pacific.
This is the story of the zombie river that came back to life, and the 8,000 pioneers that led the charge. You need to see this to believe it.
There's a saying, life will out. Life will out. And we're souls having a human experience. All of our souls plan everything so that we can see ourselves and improve ourselves, which I know is happening right now. And something I had to accept is that we have to explore our depths, our darkest parts, which then catapult us to our heights. We have to surrender to the feminine, to the emotions, and gain the kinetic energy that creates. And because we're an energy body, we're a soul, laws of physics apply. And that surrender and that kinetic energy we gain from the surrender is what catapults us to our next mountaintop. And that's learning to surf the waves of life. And we went into a deep, dark wave, but we had to go that deep and dark to expand our consciousness to include enlightenment for all, which is, I'm the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene. That's one of the things I'm doing. When I expanded my emotional range to include enlightenment, and I'm the emotional center of the collective on Earth, then that naturally influences all other souls. So that's what's coming. Enlightenment is coming.
The concrete tomb that silenced a queen. The year was 1913, and the Elwha River in Washington state went silent. For thousands of years, this river had been a roaring highway for the kings of the Pacific, the massive Chinook salmon. We are talking about fish so large that indigenous legends say they could drag a canoe upstream. These were the tai, giants weighing over 100 pounds, muscles of pure silver and determination. But then came the concrete. Thomas Aldwell, a man with a vision for power and progress, built a dam.
Progress. When progress comes from the mind and not the soul, it's short-term thinking. So all of the wisdom and knowledge in the universe is stored in every single soul. And our hearts, the neurological system in our hearts is far more complex than our brains. And our hearts send far more signals to our brains the other way around. But when we close down our hearts with fear, guilt, and shame, then all we're left with is our brain is a top-down approach. God, gave humans dominion over animals and nature. I'm arguing that that's indicative of a human with a closed heart.
It was a marvel of engineering for its time, standing over 100 feet tall. But here is the catch. He didn't build a fish ladder. It wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. In the early 20th century, the prevailing attitude was that nature was something to be tamed, harnessed, and used.
Nature is feminine, right? The repression and lack of understanding of the feminine. But when we repress the feminine so much, we get things like trans kids, which I would say, from a mother's perspective and in my spiritual understanding, that was our deepest, darkest moment, is trans kids. That telling kids, I don't know who you are. You get to decide who you are. And we might just need to cut off your genitals and give you medication for the rest of your life. But that's how you can stop yourself from committing suicide. That's the only way. We only had surgery the past couple hundred years, and humans have been here for millions. So how? But that was a very shame, that amount of shame, guilt, and fear, and just lack of understanding, that amount of darkness. We had to go there because that amount of darkness, the kinetic energy gained from going that dark, is what catapulted us to the collective being able to experience the emotion of enlightenment. Yeah, enlightenment's an emotion.
Electricity generated by the Elwha Dam powered the growing town of Port Angeles and fueled the local lumber mills. But the cost was hidden underwater. Almost overnight, 70 miles of pristine spawning habitat vanished. The concrete curtains slammed down, cutting the river in half. The salmon, guided by an ancient internal compass, slammed their noses against the gray wall, jumping uselessly until they exhausted their energy reserves. For the lower Elwha Klallam tribe, whose creation site lay coiled beneath the rising reservoir, it wasn't just an environmental loss. It was a spiritual amputation. The river was their lifeblood, and the artery had...
So you see Native Americans, like the river and the salmon are their lifeblood, and then they have rituals, and they celebrate the salmon, and the salmon and the Native Americans work together like the bison and different Native American tribes, because they understood internal guidance, and that internal guidance led them to be in correct relationship. We take care of them, they feed us, yay, everyone's happy. Right? Of course, salmon died, and of course, Native Americans died, because there's life and there's death. But we don't accept reality. We don't listen to other people because we're so busy being right. Like with Manifest Destiny, God gave us dominion. God says we're right, you're wrong. You're savages. God, we're Christian. We're better. What?
Been clamped shut. It is hard to overstate how quickly an ecosystem collapses when you take away the keystone. Without the salmon, the nutrients stopped flowing. You have to understand, a salmon is basically a package of ocean energy delivered to the forest. They eat in the nutrient-rich Pacific and die in the nutrient-poor mountains.
They bring all this nutrition into the forest, a lot of nitrogen, and that's what prevents the wildfires. Now, the Native Americans probably could have told us that, But, they were savages, so why would we listen to them? We had already determined they're savages. Wolves are predators. Bad, evil, we're moral, you're not. Right? Wrong? No emotional maturity.
Without that delivery service, the trees along the banks grew slower. The insects vanished. The eagles moved on. The river became a sterile, cold channel of water, a ghost of its former self. By the 1990s, the legendary 100-pound tai were gone. The genetic lineage that had survived ice ages and earthquakes was wiped out in a human lifetime. Fewer than 3,000 fish returned annually, huddled in the crowded lower 5 miles of the river, fighting for space in poor quality water. It was a tragic, slow-motion disaster. But then, something shifted. The dams, once symbols of progress, were now old, dangerous, and blocking a potential gold mine of nature.
There's a saying, time heals all wounds. And time gives us opportunity to self-reflect, gather more data to see where we're right and see where we're wrong, and there's just so much work being done in America and also in Europe to bring back these keystone species. Like in England, it's so cool that all of a sudden some beavers showed up and then they just let them be. And then they realized, oh, they stopped flooding. Oh, they stopped drought. They're really helpful. But, someone kind of probably sleek, oh, what, me? What? No, me? No. Oh, there's beavers. Cool.
In 2011, the US government made a decision that shocked the world. They were going to tear them down. Not patch them, not fix them, remove them entirely. It was the largest dam removal project in history. But there was a massive, glaring problem. The river had been empty for a century. Even if you open the door, who is going to walk through it if everyone who lived there passed away 90 years ago? The genetic memory was gone. There were no maps left in the instincts of living fish.
But here's the thing. The field is the sole governing agency of the particle. Every soul houses all the wisdom and knowledge in the universe. And when you follow your internal guidance, this all makes sense. But when you don't acknowledge that fish have a soul to guide them, then you wonder how this happens. And I realize that when I don't acknowledge reality, reality seems wrong. But when I acknowledge reality, I'm like, oh, that's why I haven't made money yet. Oh, that I'm not ready yet. That's true. I don't should myself, I accept myself. When we accept what salmon do, we don't should them with control of shame, guilt, and fear.
This brings us to the edge of a cliff, staring down at a muddy, recovering river, wondering if we had just made a $300 million mistake. The Canadian gamble that defied logic. The river was free, but it was empty. The water ran brown with sediment as the dams crumbled, unleashing 20 million cubic yards of trapped silt. It looked less like a river and more like a mudslide. And this is where the scientists had to make a choice.
But this is resilience. This is how resilient we are. This is how much we can go through and come back. If Native Americans can, 90% of their population was decimated, along with more than 90% of the bison, and now the Native Americans in America have restored their population, and the population of bison is already at 500,000. We can do this. Self-love creates heaven on earth. And learning that salmon are a keystone species for me is heaven on earth. Learning about the buffalo is heaven on earth. All of this for me is heaven on earth.
That split the community. Do we wait for stray salmon to find the river naturally? That could take decades, maybe centuries. Or do we jumpstart the engine? Enter the Canadian connection. Fishery scientists in British Columbia and the U.S. Pacific Northwest share a lot of data, and they knew that the clock was ticking. They decided to play God, just a little bit. They sourced Chinook salmon from nearby hatcheries, stock that was originally derived from the Elwha but had been bred in captivity for generations. This was highly controversial. You have to understand, there is a war in the biology world between wild fish advocates and hatchery supporters. The fear is that hatchery fish are dumb. They are fed pellets in concrete pools. They don't know how to hide from seals. They don't know how to hunt.
And are they
Critic
getting all the nutrients from the ocean by being in a hatchery? Because I never buy fish from a hatchery because it has a lot of mercury and other problems.
argued that dumping these domesticated fish into the wild was like releasing a poodle into a wolf pack and expecting it to lead the hunt. But the team didn't have a choice. They needed numbers, and they needed them fast. In the spring of 2012, trucks rolled up to the river. Hoses were deployed, and in a chaotic rush of water and scales, 8,000 juvenile Chinook salmon were flushed into the Elwha. These fish were tiny, just smolts preparing for their journey to the ocean. They had no parents to guide them, no established pheromone trail to follow back. They were being asked to imprint on a river that was still bleeding mud from the dam removal. The scientists tracked them as they swam downstream, dodging predators, navigating the sediment plumes, and hitting the saltwater of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Once they hit the ocean, they were black boxes. You can't track 8,000 3-inch fish in the vastness of the Pacific. They vanished. For 2 years, there was silence. The scientists went back to their offices. They analyzed the water quality. They counted the bugs. But mostly, they waited. The skepticism was high. The common theory said that salmon need a distinct, clear chemical signature to find home. The Elwha was a chaotic.
See, they're making an assumption because they don't accept that salmon have a soul. And granted, I get it. But my contention is that their soul guided them, the internal guidance. That's what I think, and that it's in their hearts to come back, and us all be in great relationship with each other and create heaven on earth together. And it doesn't mean there won't be killing, and it doesn't mean there won't be pain, because we need to experience all of our emotions, our full emotional range. I'll go over that after we get the otters, but this is so beautiful.
Mess of shifting mud and new channels. It didn't smell like a stable river. It smelled like a construction site. The waiting game is the hardest part of restoration. You spend millions of dollars, months of labor, and then you just have to trust that a fish with a brain the size of a pea can navigate thousands of miles of ocean.
See, again, the brain is in charge and not the heart. It's not acknowledging that our hearts are a vortex. Like, our heart's a vortex in fish. I haven't studied it, but I have to imagine there's some of that going on.
Dodge orca whales, avoid fishing nets, and somehow find the one specific river mouth where you dropped it off 2 years ago. The odds were astronomically low. Most models predicted a return rate of maybe 0.5 to 1%. And then came the autumn of 2014. The leaves were turning gold, the air was getting crisp, and the eyes of the biological world were fixed on the sonar counters in the lower river. Days passed. Nothing. More days. Just shadows. Then a blip. Then another. And suddenly the river wasn't empty anymore. A silver ghost army rises from the dead. It started as a trickle, then it became a flood. The sonar images lit up like a Christmas tree. The fish weren't just coming back, they were storming the gates. In 2014, and peaking in 2015, the returns defied every logical projection. Let's look at the numbers because they are staggering. Over 3,000 adult Chinook returned, but when you look at the survival rates of the specific release groups, the numbers jumped off the page. We are talking about return rates pushing past 37% for some groups. In the world of fisheries, that is not just a success, that is a statistical anomaly. It is like buying a lottery ticket and winning the jackpot 3 times in a row. These fish had navigated the open ocean, survived the blob, a massive heat wave in the Pacific that was decimating other populations, and found their way back to a river they had only known for a few weeks as babies. They bypassed the sites where the dams used to stand, swimming through canyons that hadn't seen a fish since the Titanic was on the drawing board. Biologists were scrambling to snorkel the river, counting fish. They saw massive Chinook holding in pools that didn't exist 5 years prior. They saw them pairing off on gravel beds that had been buried under 50 feet of water. It was a resurrection. But here is where the zombie aspect comes in, and it is fascinating. Pacific salmon are semilparous. That means they spawn once and then they perish. It is a one-way ticket. As thousands of these massive fish completed their mission, their bodies began to break down. This sounds morbid, but in nature, death is just a transfer of energy.
Did you know a
The
dead tree can provide more life to other species than a living tree? So how much like nutrients and just abundance can a dead fish create?
smell of the river changed. It started to smell like rotting fish, which to a biologist smells like victory. This decay released tons of nitrogen and phosphorus. The isotope analysis of the trees along the bank started to shift immediately. The trees were literally sucking up the bodies of the salmon. Scientists found marine-derived nitrogen, chemicals that can only come from the ocean, inside the leaves of maples and alders miles inland.
Maple leaves need ocean nutrients? Yeah, we're all connected. We're all connected.
The ecosystem wasn't just observing the return, it was consuming it. Black bears, which had been surviving on berries and grubs, suddenly had an all-you-can-eat sushi buffet. Their population density didn't just increase, the bears got fatter. Sows entered hibernation with thicker layers of fat, which meant they could support more cubs. The average litter size likely increased, all because of that initial release of 8,000 fish.
Yeah, I will link this below because they give off a lot more facts about the rest of the, when you tear down the dams and the fish come back about, what happens. So let's go to a quick one on the bison and what the bison do. And we'll finish it off with the otters before I do a deep dive into how you can learn to listen to yourself, how you can turn your wounds into wisdom, how you can stop having an external source of authority and establish your own soul as your internal source of authority. But let's learn from the bisons because I just love them. I used to tell my kids that they don't get to win the trauma Olympics because they slept under 3 deer heads when I had to sleep in the den with all 4 walls covered with deer heads and fish and then a buffalo head. I'm like, no, I won the trauma Olympics for that. Okay, let me make it bigger here. Okay, here we go.
Bison potentially could play an important role in their ecosystem. We know that they did historically when they existed, in the millions. They are ecosystem engineers in that when you have so many bison living in an area, they trample the ground in a particular way, they graze in a particular way.
Bison do help increase the biodiversity of the grassland just because of those roles that they play by what they're doing to the soil, what they're doing to the vegetation community. So you will see certain species of birds, insects, and plants that are present when bison are present. And it might help some populations that can exist when bison aren't there, but it helps, for example, prairie dogs. And prairie dogs, when prairie dogs are there, that helps increase golden eagle populations. That increases black-footed ferret populations. They also do 2 kind of unusual behaviors that cattle don't do. One is that they wallow. You may have seen film where bison are constantly giving themselves dust baths. And what that does is it creates this bare spot in the grassland in a depression. And that is a great habitat for certain types of plants that you don't normally find in grasslands if there are no bison. And with that wallowing compresses the soil quite a bit, and sometimes it can form like an ephemeral wetland. So it's been shown that when you have bison on the landscape and they're wallowing, it can help certain species of amphibians like frogs or salamanders. And bison do something else which you won't find cattle doing, is that they do something called horning. And it's rubbing their horns against trees. And this actually kills trees, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's a good thing for grasslands because one of the dangers for grasslands is tree encroachment. The forests are constantly trying to come in and take over the grassland. And so bison kind of keep the trees out and helps the...
It's a healthy boundary. And like I said earlier, dead trees provide a habitat for tons of life. So just because it's dead doesn't mean it's not necessary and helpful. Right? It's just a different purpose. It's being repurposed.
That maintain the grassland overall.
All right. Okay. So we are at the otters, and I just came upon the otters like was it today or yesterday? And I was like, that's fascinating because this gets into nuclear bombs and otter populations and nuclear bomb testing. And yeah, let's get into that.
The internet is flooded with sea otters, and no surprise, they are probably the cutest thing you could ever think of. They hold paws when they sleep and wrap themselves up in kelp to stop drifting out to sea. And they have a loose patch of skin under their armpit to store their favorite rock. I found a sea otter live stream and a sea otter in a Jedi robe on Twitter. But out of all content, the one that grabbed me the most was this historic film. It's from the 1970s. Here, sea otters are being captured, packed into wooden boxes, and then dropped off by aircraft thousands of kilometers away. You might be asking yourself, why on earth is the Atomic Energy Commission making films about sea otters? At least, this was the question that popped into my head. Well, they had a very good reason indeed. In the late 1960s, the AEC was testing nuclear bombs on Amchitka Island. And
God gave us dominion over nature and animals. Why did the German scientists at the end of World War II say that they couldn't make a nuclear bomb? Maybe they had some morality to them.
Amchitka was exactly the place where the otters from the video had come from. Back then, Amchitka had the biggest sea otter colony in the North Pacific, but otters weren't the only inhabitants of the island. Amchitka had been part of the Aleutians National Wildlife Refuge since 1913 and was home to walruses, sea lions, seabirds, and more. Because of the island's rich biodiversity, the AEC was facing very real pressure, at home and abroad, to discontinue nuclear testing. But then US President Richard Nixon wanted to continue nuclear testing on the island. In fact, he wanted to detonate the largest underground nuclear bomb ever, codenamed Cannakin. The AEC needed to convince the public that their activities were safe and beneficial to society. But this decision-making was extremely controversial, and anti-war and environmental activists started organizing themselves. This meeting led to the formation of an environmental organization you surely know very well. The activists feared that the explosion could trigger a mass mortality event among the island's wildlife, environmental contamination, or even earthquakes. Side note, Amchitka is one of the most tectonically unstable places in America. As political and public concerns got bigger and bigger, the Atomic Energy Commission started producing short propaganda films, like this one with happy otters. As this still wasn't enough, they finally said, okay, fine, we will fly scientists to Amchitka to study the potential impacts of the test on the local otter population. And that's when James Estes enters the picture. Estes had just completed his master's degree at Washington State University in 1969. At that time, the country was in the middle of the Vietnam War. Estes needed to prepare to join the military, but to his surprise, he flunked the physical exam because of a minor instability in his knee, an old baseball injury.
That's a prime example of my soul has a plan so I can fulfill my soul's purpose. And this man, it has an important soul's purpose.
These unexpected circumstances allowed him to apply for the AEC job in Amchitka. He hadn't worked with sea otters before, but he would give it a try. And so, in the 1970s, the young scientist hopped on a plane and began a unique scientific journey. Spoiler, Estes' work was groundbreaking. He not only analyzed the impact of the Cannakin test, but also highlighted the ecological role of top-level predators.
Again, we're seeing trophic cascades. We're going to see how the otters interact with sea urchins in kelp, and how that the biodiversity there and that kind of complexity is what we're missing in a lot of the world, because our sea otter population is still not what it used to be.
And he provided the basis for today's understanding that sea otters are mitigating negative climate effects. In 1970, when he first set foot on the Alaskan island of Amchitka, James Estes was greeted by an ocean filled with furry faces. Everywhere the young biologist looked, there were sea otters, hanging around on kelp beds, shelling sea urchins, exchanging their signature squeals. Back then, crowds of these charismatic creatures were everywhere. For Estes, an intensive year of research lay ahead in a perfect natural lab. Amchitka is the southernmost link of the Aleutian Island chain that swings across the Bering Sea from North America almost to the Russian coast. The island lost its native Aleut population in the 19th century. During World War II, it was used as an airfield by US forces to fight off Japanese troops. By the way, if you search on Google Earth, you can still see the airfield, although more than half of the island is blurred. Some people suspect that this has something to do with its nuclear testing history, because in the late 1960s, the US Atomic Energy Commission decided to use the infrastructure left behind by the military and test the latest nuclear bombs on Amchitka. These consecutive events led to James Estes being sent to the island to study sea otters. Back then, the Aleutian Island chain provided the perfect conditions for sea otter research. The population had just started to recover from the fur trade of the 18th and 19th century, which wiped out about 99% of the animals. Originally, sea otters ranged around the North Pacific coast, from the north of Japan to the west coast of California. They were hunted intensively for their dense coats until
So just
1911.
imagine now, they said, what, 99% of the population is gone, and that the existence of sea otters keeps the kelp beds alive, and the kelp beds store carbon. So how much carbon are we not storing because we killed the sea otters? And that's just the sea otters. Like the beavers, the buffalo, the salmon. How much have we done this to ourselves because we had a belief, we had an ideology? It was progress, right? Christianity's the way more than Judaism. I'm not saying Judaism's right, but God gave us dominion over the land, over nature and animals. What do we do with that dominion? Were we responsible with it? Or were we arrogant and short-sighted and unable to listen to, the savages?
When both sea otters and seals were given protection under the International Fur Seal Treaty. But by that time, only a few healthy pockets of the species had survived. And this was what Estes observed.
We saw the same thing with the bison and the wolves, like just decimated with tiny little populations left.
Arrived on the Aleutian Islands. In some places, there were lots of otters. In others, there were a few, and in still others, otters were totally absent. He studied the mammals on and offshore. When diving off the coast of Amchitka, he found lush kelp forests, which the local sea otters called home. But when he visited Attu, a neighboring island, he discovered a completely different pattern. Here, the ocean floor looked totally different. Estes saw thousands of urchins painting the seabed purple. There were no otters and almost no kelp. It was a total contrast to what he knew from Amchitka. And that was the moment when he took a completely new direction in his research. It became clear in an instant. Where the sea otters had disappeared, the underwater world had become an underwater desert. But where otters were still present, so too were kelp forests and other species like fish, crabs, snails, seals, and many more. And all that has to do with the sea otter's appetite. Sea otters are the only marine mammals that don't have a thick layer of blubber. Instead, they rely on a very dense fur coat and an incredibly impressive metabolism. They need to eat a quarter of their body weight daily. That means adults will consume 8 to 10 kilograms of shellfish a day. Luckily, their favorite food is sea urchins. A single sea otter can scarf down nearly 1,000 sea urchins in one day. For their size and how cute they are aggressive eaters. They eat them like popcorn. Sea urchins are the dominant herbivore in their environment. They are small and spiky and multiply rapidly. And just like sea otters, they are voracious
multiply
eaters.
rapidly. So that amount of kind of, death and destruction, you could say death and destruction of the sea otters is what is a happy balance. Like, is it water voles that live where beaver live, and they create a lot of offspring, but a lot of those offspring are eaten by birds and foxes and other smaller mammals. It's all by design. All of our souls worked it out over millions of years, and when we come in and remove something from, remove a piece of the structure, well, that makes sense. The structure falls down. Like if I move a wall in my house, then that makes my house more insecure, less stable.
They used their sharp teeth to literally mow through kelp forests. They cut off the kelp where it's attached to the ground. The rest of the kelp string then rises to the ocean surface where it washes ashore. It's estimated that 95% of all kelp forests have been lost to these sea urchins.
95% of our kelp forests that all we saw how, from Japan all the way over to California. 95%. What do you think restoring the kelp forest will do for our carbon emissions? There's a natural way to resolve this. And I think we need to start there.
This research back in the 1970s. Today's scientists believe that the only way to bring the kelp forests back is to bring back the sea otters.
So I'll link this below. But let's get into how we live in a holographic universe. That the universe is a mirror showing us ourselves in every moment as a constant feedback loop for self-improvement. We project from our hearts. So when you have a healthy heart, you interact with the landscape in a healthy way, like the salmon. They had a healthy soul, healthy heart, and they knew to go back. The otters, you put them back in that environment and they know what to do. You leave a healthy woman in a home with kids, she knows how to take care of them. We're souls having a human experience. There's nothing to figure out here. We just need to learn how to listen to our internal guidance. So let me share part of my presentation here, and we'll go over how the universe, why the universe is holographic, that we live, that the universe is a mirror. So it's all based on the laws of physics. The field is the sole governing agency of the particle. Albert Einstein, physics, thank you so much. But let's look at the map of consciousness. And what this shows is that these are all our emotions, expressions of our soul. So our soul expresses itself via emotions out through our heart. Their neurological structure in our heart is far more complex than our brains, and our hearts send far more signals to our brains the other way around. The feminine goes first, like the feminine drop her handkerchief and the man decides what to do. The heart, the emotion, is the feminine, communicates to the masculine. The masculine decides what to do. That's a healthy system. But when the heart's closed down and we, ignore our emotional reality, then we overactivate the brain. Then we get ideas. We focus on that, I'll use a Carl Jung quote because I love Carl Jung. One does not become enlightened by imagining beings of light. One does not become enlightened by imagining utopia, perfectionism, communism. Everybody has everything. Well, when everybody will have everything? When we love ourselves enough to have everything, to attract that into our lives. Because the end of that quote is, he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining beings of light, but by making their darkness conscious, by making their fear, guilt, and shame about how they feel about themselves, bring that into the light, pull out the wisdom and knowledge out of that, and become a more emotionally balanced and mature human being with a larger emotional range. But in order to expand our emotional range, we have to surrender to our emotions first. So the dive comes first before the climb. Okay? So and that's laws of physics. If you want to build the kinetic energy on the downhill to climb the uphill, like you don't climb Mount Everest by just, I want to climb Mount Everest, walk over there and climb. No, you surrender to the preparation and then you climb. The woman drops her handkerchief. There's the surrender. The man decides what to do. There's a way of things. There's healthy femininity and healthy masculinity. I know we're still arguing over what that is, but that shows you how much progress we have not made. That we don't even know what a healthy man and a healthy woman is, at a functional level that we can all agree on. That's a problem. But here are all of our emotions, and here are the different hertz that our emotions vibrate at. And Cancer vibrates at 100 hertz or below. So if you're spending most of your time at 500 to 1,000 hertz, Cancer at 100 hertz or below isn't surviving there because the fastest moving energy is the most powerful, the most transformative energy. Can't survive. Viruses, bacteria can't survive down here. They all vibrate at less than 100 hertz. I haven't been sick in 6 years. I didn't get sick over COVID, and I was at hot yoga the whole time. So this is how we express ourselves, and how we expand our emotional range is by going into our depths, and then that catapults us to our heights. Want to climb Mount Everest? You got to do a deep dive of preparation first. There's a surrender. Surrender to the work necessary. Surrender to, how do I pull more self-belief and self-confidence and more capability out of myself physically? Well, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. So if the field is healthy, the particle will be healthy. The field meaning the soul, the particle meaning the body. But I'll just explain this physics experiment right here, that what they have is that, so when our emotions come out of our hearts, and our hearts are a vortex, I won't get into that in this video, but I have other videos on that. But, physiologically, it's a vortex. Blood flows in a spiral in the embryo before there's a heart even formed. So how can blood flow if the heart's not pumping, right? We've been taught that heart's a pump. Well, that's not true. That's God gave us dominion over nature. External authority as opposed to internal authority. But we have internal authority, and our heart's a vortex, like a black hole. That's creation. Black holes create. Feminine is creation. That's a pretty powerful human being. Does the government want to give us that much power? I don't know. So what happens is, when, let's say, I project selfishness out of my heart that vibrates at 40 hertz, I'm just giving an example. Other souls that also vibrate at 40 hertz will start moving. Okay, and that's how I see myself. So in this experiment, they have two tuning forks. One's 512 hertz and one's 440 hertz. And when the 512 moves, the 440 doesn't even notice. But when it's 440 and 440, the 440 moves, the other 440 moves as well, and there's the perception. What you seek seeks you. That's Rumi, proven by the laws of physics. When my 40 hertz moves, and I, put attention on that, then other 40 hertz will move too. It's like we're drawn to each other, and then we let it go. We connect and we disconnect. Connect is the feminine, disconnect is the masculine. Connect, disconnect. That's how it is. So when we accept that we're souls having a human experience, and that how I feel about myself is projected externally so I can see myself, I don't call other people racist or transphobic or selfish, because I know that when I perceive that outside of myself, that is my soul showing me my own selfishness, my own lack of self-control, my own problems, and my beauty, and my, what's great about me, all of it. So please check out my free ebook below. That'll get you started on learning how to turn your emotional wounds into personal wisdom. I take a very multidisciplinary approach. As you see, I use psychology, laws of physics, cardiology, neuroscience, and really the process of healing from your childhood trauma is recalibrating your nervous system to resonate with love, compassion, and enlightenment instead of fear, guilt, and shame. Childhood trauma calibrates your nervous system for fear, guilt, and shame. So that's your signal, is fear, guilt, and shame. And so you attract a lot of fear, guilt, and shame into your life to see yourself. But when you don't understand that we live in a holographic universe, that the universe is a mirror, our ideas are, that's not me. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. I'm right. I'm perfect. Okay, so anyway, please like and subscribe. I hope you appreciate the video. I know I cried some, but I had to share my heart. I'm a woman. I share my heart. All right, thank you so much. Take care. Bye.